This is good, right?
Exactly
Guys,
what
most
I
of you are
said.
coming up times I just go like this, like the teacher. Yeah, so thank you. I will make this quick. I am Nancy Grandin. For those of you who haven't heard the spiel before, I am the president of the Simsbury Pollinator Pathway, and we are most appreciative that you are, I keep seeing the same people, so that there are many of you that have come back for some or all of the presentations that we are making. Those of you who are, this is your first time, welcome. We will have all of our presentations on the website. This is the last one that we're going to video, at least for now. And when that is, they are all up, which my poor husband, every day I'm like, are we done yet? Are we done yet? So as soon as that happens, we will post that on our Facebook page. So we encourage you to follow that. If you are on Facebook, it's the best way to sort of keep track of what we're doing. As usual, we're going to just send around a sign-up sheet. This is just so we can keep track of everybody who's come, as well as get your emails and that kind of thing, so that we can get in touch with you as needed. If you have attended before, you don't need to put all your information. Please just put your name, your zip, and if you are interested in volunteering, or buying one of our signs, to put your these would be for Simsbury people, your Simsbury property on part of the pollinator pathway. This is the best way to do that. So if you are new, same thing, we'd love to have you volunteer, we'd love to have you put your property on the pathway, but we would appreciate your full information here, and we don't share this with anybody, so you don't have to worry about that. We usually, the way that this runs is our presenters do about an hour, and then we have a little bit of time afterwards for questions. We will, if the questions don't get answered, or if there are enough people who want to ask different things, usually you guys are around for 10 or so minutes after. It's just sort of en masse. We have to be out of here by 8:30. We will be hosting a series, again, on our Facebook page for everyone, where we're going to do an Ask the Experts. So as you're going through the spring and the summer and the fall, and you have questions, a couple times a month, we'll put it up and we'll say, send us your questions, and then our experts, which includes Marjorie back there, surprise! The people who are helping us get the information out, we will be asking them to provide that. So don't ever feel that you are hesitant to ask us questions. That's what we're here for. We want everybody to be successful in what you're doing. So we appreciate you being here. Thank you to Lisa and Madison for back from our first one. And
all right. Let me know if this is a problem in the back. I have I'm pretty loud, so you should be able to hear me even without the mic, but just let me know. Madison and I are going to be leading you through some hopefully easy things you can do at home to make a huge difference. A note about the QR codes. This is an innovation that we're trying. Hopefully it'll work for you. Thank you to Carl, Madison's partner, who did these, came up with the idea and did this one, and the one that's coming around on the clipboard is a list of references and resources and live links if you scan the QR code for a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, and resources for you to go to. This QR code is all of the slides that we're going to be going through. So if you want to refer back to them, it also has our contact information on it at the end. So thank you to Nancy and the Simsbury Pollinator Pathway, the rest of the board, the library, and it's really been encouraging to see as many people show up at these. Every one of these has had more and more and more. And it's really been hopeful that so many people are looking for ways to do things differently. And that's what we're gonna hopefully help you out with. So, thank you. So it is spring. Last week was officially spring, and here's some pretty pictures of what we're gonna start seeing very, very soon. Our whole point is about saving insects and birds and other wildlife, and ultimately ourselves. If we don't do that, we're in big trouble. And we're focusing on native plants and also some of our practices in our home habitat. We want to promote life insect biodiversity. That picture on the left is actually one of my favorites because it looks like a bunch of dead stuff, but there's so much life in there. And we'll talk about that more. How many people have been here for all of the sessions? How many people were here for mine in the beginning? Ours, sorry. I'm going to run through kind of a recap because with our presentation and Kyle's on the bees and Marjorie's 2 presentations, there were some really clear and consistent themes that we saw. And these are they. Clear and consistent, simple actions to take. And one of the things we want to say is that it really is simple. And when we talk about this, a lot of it is what not to do. And you can have just a huge impact by taking some very simple steps. One of the things that's not up here is turning the lights off at night and getting motion detector lights, because lights on in the summertime, spring and summertime, is really detrimental to insect life. One of the things that's on the links on the QR code with the resources is a link to Doug Talamy's work through the Homegrown National Park. And there's also a YouTube channel for Homegrown National Park. Take, a half hour, 40 minutes and watch one of his talks. It's really, really inspiring, and he talks about light pollution. So the actions that we have to take are really very simple. We need to tolerate some damage. We've got to get away from this notion that things have to be perfect and that every insect should be killed. If we want to see birds, if we want to see butterflies, we have to allow the caterpillars to live and the insects to live that the birds feed on, the caterpillars and the insects. And that means that if we're going to plant native plants, those insects are going to come and munch on them. That's a good thing. And so we need to be willing to tolerate some damage. And if you plant enough stuff, as Marjorie said last time, I think, if there are enough caterpillars to feed the birds, they're not going to do that much damage because the birds are going to feed on the caterpillars and reduce the damage. So there's a balance that we have to live with. Choose natives. Here's 3 pretty pictures of native plants. The one on the left is a coneflower and a fritillary. Is that what that is? I shouldn't. I'm looking at
Great Spangle.
I'm looking at Marjorie. I'm not as good at identifying butterflies, but that's a beautiful butterfly that we see in a lot of our gardens with native plants. The middle one everyone knows is a monarch caterpillar getting ready to go into his chrysalis, and that's a goldenrod on the right with, I don't even think you can count how many bumblebees are on that. And that was a first-year growth we planted, or it may have been even a volunteer, something that just came up on its own through seed that spread. But we want people to plant more native plants. There's back to the messy gardens. We are obsessed with cleaning up our gardens. You see signs all over the place. Spring cleanup, fall cleanup. We have to be more tolerant of a little bit of mess. Busy is better. And again, these pictures, there's so much life in there. I'll tell the story again. Everyone's sick of hearing this that spends any time with me. A couple of years ago, I broke my foot in October. Fortunately, Carl and Madison were able to take care of all the customers. My own garden looked like this all winter long. That was the first time, that was the wake-up call to me to be messy, because I'm the one, I used to be the one that cleaned everything up obsessively because I like to be outside. I like to look neat. I couldn't get outside. I had a broken foot, and there was more bird action in our yard that winter than I had ever seen before. Leave it a little bit messy. Mow less frequent. This is one of my favorites. Thank you to Madison. Do your clothes still look like this? No. So why does your yard still look like that? We're trying to get away from that sterile, perfectly green golf course kind of looking lawn, because a lawn that's perfectly weed-free and green is an ecological dead zone. It's maybe nice to look at, but it's not supporting any life. Who here has heard of No Mow May? Of course. It's a great slogan. It gets people's attention. It got a ton of media attention last spring. No Mow May, it's a catchy title. There is, and again, this is on the resource links, the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation recently did a webinar on No Mow May. And it was really interesting and really enlightening, and it's a great thing to do, to not mow, but the problem is, maybe it should be No Mow May April, maybe it should be No Mow June. We don't really know. It's just No Mow May is more about getting the word out in places. It's just a start and a catchy phrase. One of the things we have to think about is that if we're not mowing in May, a lawn that doesn't have any beneficial weeds like violets and clover and other kinds of things that the early insects, the early pollinators feed on, what does it matter if we mow or not, if there's nothing there to start with? So No Mow May is kind of a good gimmick, but it's just a start. Just one thing I want to raise, I don't necessarily want to discuss it, I don't live in Simsbury, but does Simsbury have any town ordinances about lawn maintenance? I've run up against that in other towns, that I won't mention. Nancy is shaking her head, that's good, because no one can get in trouble then with the town for having an overgrown front lawn, but that is an issue in some towns. Okay, this is one of my, really don't want to talk about this guy. This guy, and I'll say guy because it is a guy, although I have met women, pesticide applicators. First, let me draw your attention to the source for this picture, Turk Magazine. The article was mosquito control as big business. It's a big business, they make a lot of money on this. We need to do things differently. For one thing, pesticides rarely impact only the target species. I spent a little bit of time kind of tooling around the websites of the 3 biggest local companies that do mosquito and tick spraying, and no, Nancy, I won't mention any of them by name, can't do that. There are 3 big ones, you've seen them, you know who they are, and then there's probably a lot of smaller ones that I don't know about. And when you look at their websites, it's really misleading. They talk about natural control, and if you don't want the chemicals, they'll sell you a program of natural control. Doesn't really say what it is. What we think it probably is the pyrethroids, which are synthetic replication of a natural toxin, but it's still a toxin. Cedar oil is another one that they use as a natural control. It's still killing stuff. That's what they're trying to do. The other thing is they boast about their spray barrier. The barrier will keep adult mosquitoes out of, I have to do this, dead little butterfly lessons. The barrier spray keeps the adults out. When are adult mosquitoes biting you? In the evening, right? When is this guy spraying? During the day. How many adults is he killing? None, right there. He's killing other stuff. But what they talk about is there are barrier sprays that they saturate the foliage with in your yard along the perimeter. And so that kills any mosquitoes that rest on that foliage. And guess what? A lot of other stuff rests on and feeds on that foliage. So that's the other problem. And then the third problem that I noticed is that one of them even says they're very proud to say that they treat 25 feet beyond the perimeter. So in other words, they're spraying 25 feet onto someone else's property without permission. So it's really alarming. The pesticide, this guy, the pesticide applicator, it's his job. He has a job to do. We can make sure he and the company follows the rules. So there's a couple of key rules. They can only operate with licensed state certification. They are required to have written instructions for each application, each pesticide application. they must provide, if you ask them, something called the MSDS, the Manufacturer's Safety and Data Sheet. The SDS has to be with them in their vehicle, and they must provide it if you ask for it. And they must notify anyone nearby if there's any potential for pesticide drift. So those are some really serious rules that they are required to live up to, that we should all know about. They're out there, they're doing this stuff, we should at least be able to make them do it according to the rules. And again, this information that I'm about to tell you about is on the link. The pesticide notification registry is something that we, as homeowners, can register with DEEP or with the individual pesticide spraying companies, that we have to be notified 24-hour notification before the spraying happens. So that gives us an opportunity to find out what they're spraying, what the requirements are, make sure that we're not out there, our laundry isn't out there, our pets aren't out there, make sure they don't come 25 feet onto our property. So it's a notification registry with the state, and it is required, they're required to notify abutting property owners if an application is within 100 yards of your properties. And I can answer questions about this afterwards. The link is on the resources page. I encourage everyone to get on that registry if you're concerned about this. Leave the leaves and save the stems. Again, goes back to being a little messy. Madison took this great picture of this little tiny, what is it, garden snake? I don't know, little tiny ringneck snake, little tiny guy. And there's all kinds of life in the leaves. There is insect larvae, there's this kind of thing, there's little toads that overwinter. I had a picture in the first presentation that we did of a butterfly chrysalis. A lot of butterflies overwinter in their chrysalis. And if you don't know, they blend right in with the leaves. It's the exact color of the leaves, and it's easy to blow it away. So leave the leaves, that's why we leave the leaves. Here's an example, and we'll talk more about this later. This is a job that we did a couple of years ago. This is a tiny area. This is not a huge area, and you can make a huge impact in a tiny area. So this is probably about maybe 20 feet, 15, 20 feet by, I don't know, 2.5, 3 feet?
2 at the widest.
Yeah, at the widest. But look at the difference. This is year 1, and that's year 2. That's how much grew. And a lot of our pictures of bumblebees are from this garden, because it is just literally humming when you walk by. So a dramatic change in a tiny little area. Every little bit. How many of you have heard of snakeworms? Oh, not enough. Also called jumping worms.
Yes.
They're horrifying. The reason I'm telling you about this is because we all have a role. Jokingly, this is my slogan, spread the word, not the worms. I was doing this slide today and my husband said, oh, that's a nemesis, and it does literally give me nightmares sometimes. Snakeworms are an invasive species. For those of you who don't, I won't talk a lot about it. Again, there's a lot of information on the links. It's an invasive species, and they do incredible damage to the soil structure. They eat and decompose so quickly that they leave very little nutrients for the plants. When I say they destroy the soil structure, we have a moss garden in my backyard, and they've destroyed it. It's starting to come back because I had a year of killing snakeworms. But you don't want to, if you get plants from someone else, there are ways to look for the eggs, there are ways to wash the roots. You need to be very careful in the spring. A lot of garden clubs have plant swaps. When people are always giving away plants, I give away plants, you're digging and dividing. You just need to be aware that you don't spread these things. We'll get to questions at the end. I want to make sure we get through everything.
Can I have a comment of the garden club? I'm chairperson of the Ways and Means for Simsbury Garden Club, and we're having a plant sale in May, and we spend a long time rinsing the roof
Good.
and
See?
putting fresh soil in
Awesome.
pots. It's a ton of work, so please don't be afraid.
I just want people to be aware of trading and sharing plants, that we're not also sharing the worms. That's great, I'm so happy to hear that. Because not enough people know what the buggers are, and I am bad, I will kill any worm that I see because it might be a snake worm. The worms are not, actually native to this part of the United States. I think there's one native worm, but it's so rare that we probably never see it. And the earthworms do a lot of good, but when there's a risk that it could be one of these, this is you.
So, the snake worm things is always a little bit hard for people to swallow. And the unfortunate reality is that the snake worms came over to our area sometime in the 80s, and it is very rare to find a garden that people have consistently worked in or added plants to that don't have some of these worms in them. As important as it is to not spread them, and that's really where it starts, there's also a large hand that goes along with managing them once you do have them, and learning to work around them, because there's not really a concrete way to eliminate them in our gardens. So on a happier note, talking about how we can change our spaces, how we can make them more hospitable to the kind of life that we want to be providing in our environment. So talking about choosing plants, we need to always consider our location. This is really what matters, because all of our hope and best wishes for a plant, as much as we may love it, if it's in the wrong place, it's not helping the environment, and it might die. It's just not going to thrive in areas that it's not supposed to be. So you always need to consider light and sun exposure. This is really a big one that can be pretty confusing, as well as soil texture and fertility. These are really the two big ones, because that's what plants need. They need the soil fertility, and they need the light, and then rain, which is a lot easier for us to provide for them. In addition to that, they need space, and this is a hard one for a lot of people to kind of think about with their future of their plants, because you buy something and it's a plug or it's a gallon-sized plant, and you don't know how much space it's going to take up 10, 15 years in the future. And you kind of have to be planning for that. And ultimately, what we're all most interested in is the benefit that the plant brings, because that's why we're planting these things, for our benefit, the benefit of the wildlife around us. All right. So first, do you have shade, sun, or somewhere in between? And this is kind of where you need to start. If you know you want to create a garden or even rewild an area of your property, this is where you need to start, figuring out how much sunlight you have. So the difference is, full sun is 6 hours or more. I know we see that on seed packets. We know this in our minds, but it's a very hard thing to actually make concrete. Same thing with the part shade, part sun. We need to observe these things, and there is no substitute for actually sitting down and observing them in your own yard, because there are so many things that can affect whether this is in full sun, full shade, part sun. It depends on the time of day, the time of year, what things may be providing shadows on it. So, as I said, nothing's more useful than sitting there and paying attention, and I think that is ultimately one of those things that you want to leave here with, is that nothing replaces just sitting in the environment and learning what's happening around you and near you and your role in it. At the same time, I will say that there are great tools that you can use to help you out. Some of my favorites are sun and shadow calculators. If you just type into Google sun and shadow calculators. Two of my favorites are SunCalc and Shade Map. And these are really, really helpful if you, it pulls your houses from Google, it has like the architecture of them, and then it shows you throughout the year. You can pick like the time of day and the part of the year, and it'll show you a sun map, and it'll show you the shadows that your house is casting throughout the day. It's really helpful, especially when you're trying to do a foundation planting, because now you know exactly your orientation and how much exposure is being given to it throughout the day. Of course, this depends on, if you live next to woodland, a huge stand of trees, this might affect that. And that is why, again, sitting and watching the sunlight, or garden light meters. I think you can get them on Amazon relatively cheaply. but they're basically, you basically stick them in the ground, and there's a probe that tracks how much direct sunlight they're getting throughout the day. And it'll tell you just how much sun you're getting, which is essential. Plants that need sun will not thrive without their required full sun hours. So the second thing that you want to ask, which might even be a lot easier, because in a lot of ways, tracking the sun requires us to take some serious time. It changes throughout the year, it changes throughout the day. But the soil doesn't really. So the first thing you can ask yourself, is the soil frequently wet or dry? Do you know that this area is prone to droughts or flooding or being mucky under your feet? That will really tell you what can and can't thrive there. Right after that, do we want to know whether it's more sand or clay based? I don't know if anyone has ever seen the soil triangle, but it's sand, clay, and loam. And loam is like kind of a, loam is a much more fertile material that a lot of the time we have to add. Our leaves, our sticks, the things that decompose kind of contribute to that. But fundamentally, our soils here are clay or sand based. And an easy way to figure out kind of what you're dealing with, again, is to pay a little bit of attention to it and notice what happens in dry weather and wet weather. Take a look at your soil. So in dry weather, a lot of clay soil will crack. You'll see it across the ground. It'll be like almost like scales. And that's because clay particles are so fine that they will adhere together and then crack apart when there is moisture fluctuations. And then you have a sand-based soil. A lot of the time that will look like small particles of rocks, mica. This really affects the ability of the soil to retain both water and nutrients. So you need to pay attention to these kind of things. There are some plants that thrive, that will only thrive in a sand-based soil. They don't want nutrients, they don't want your organic matter. That kind of stuff, that's too luxurious for them. They need the bare minimum for them to thrive. And then other things, a lot of our more common ornamental plants, they need the assistance. They need our leaf mulching compost and our mulch and hand watering and things like that. So to know what fits in the area without you having to add for it, knowing what's there is really fundamental. Okay, and when in doubt, we have a lot of really great resources, especially in Connecticut. We're in a really great state for our agriculture experiment station and our soil labs. I think there's one in Windsor, I know there's one in Hamden. If you're not sure what you're dealing with, you can send a sample into them. Yeah, for free, that's big. And I believe that we have, we've linked that in our references, yes. So if you really, nothing replaces having a professional analyze your soil. They can tell you what are the available nutrients, they can tell you what the pH is of the soil, and all of this stuff is ultimately going to affect what will thrive or won't thrive in that area. Okay, so the space and the location. I know that this seems really basic. How big is your area? Take measurements. But you want to be able to know that you're not putting too much or too little in your area. And you have to remember that plants grow. You're not building fine furniture. It doesn't have to be down to the centimeter. But to have a general idea of the footprint that these plants are going to take up in your space at their mature age is really invaluable. I can't tell you how often we go to places where someone very well-intentioned, they really researched what they were doing, but the plants are just too close together. And it creates problems all the way down for maintenance. And ultimately, people usually want to rip up that kind of a landscape because it's not functional for them. Which is, it just doesn't work. And at the same time, if you underplant a landscape, you have lots of more problems with weeds, with some sort of predation. I mean, if you've only got 3 of one sort of shrub and one deer comes by and eats them all, that's it. Having that kind of diversity and those numbers are really helpful to give you a robust and ecologically sound environment. And we always talk about how people overplant their environment, but there's a lot to be said for intentionally overfilled plantings. It's less often done as a foundation planting with shrubs, but if you're, covering a broad swath of land, you do really want to plant pretty close together, maybe closer than is even recommended, to outcompete weeds and to establish an overall ground cover that both helps the soil, it prevents erosion, and ultimately provides better habitat for the creatures that are trying to use those plants. Okay, and again, when in doubt, there are lots of people that you can ask. It never hurts to scour the web for this kind of information, to shoot off an email to anyone who you think might know about it. If they can help you, they can. If they can't, you keep looking. It's one of those things where all of the information that you have will never hurt you. It'll only make your environment better and the place that you're trying to cultivate a little bit more sustainable. So, the plant choices and benefits. This is kind of what it comes down to, ultimately, and this is why we're all here. We want to make better plant choices because we care about the benefit that they have in our landscape. And we have to really kind of decide before picking these plants, in addition to all of their site criteria, what are we hoping to achieve? I love to hear when people are just trying to beautify an area and feed wildlife, like, you know, that's the best thing in the world to hear. But there are a lot more practical implications for planting. People need screening, they need things to stabilize soil, they have areas where grass can't grow or that people can't mow, and they need something that's going to hold that ground in place and ideally also provide habitat and food for the animals and the creatures around us. So knowing your purpose in your planting is really huge. So like I said a little earlier, you can have an idea of what plants you want and what plants will be great, but if they can't thrive in that area, they're not going to be doing you a service or anything else. Okay, so this is an example of starting small. You can see here, this is a customer that, I don't know, me and Lisa have been working at least as long as I've been around. We've been there for 5 or 6 years. And this was always like afterthought area. We've done work in her backyard, on her side yard. This was never a thing until we mentioned to her that, you know, this area has a lot of possibility. She'd always been upset with the fact that the grass never grew, things were falling out through the rocks, it couldn't stabilize the area. So we suggested that we would put together a sun garden bed for that little strip. And this picture, I wish I had a picture of it from this past year, because that would be 2 years in. And I remember going there and being like, oh my God, I can't believe you planted this so recently. Because these plants right here had spread and filled the ground. You could barely see, you know, dirt in between, which is really what we want. We want there to be so much greenery that we can't see the dirt in between. There was no more erosion, there were tons of pollinators. She was super thrilled about this site, and honestly, so were we. It did everything that we wanted it to do, and really, beforehand, it was just such an eyesore. It was a maintenance hazard, it was an eyesore. It provided nothing to no one. And then, what we did with it, it really, it changed the whole dynamic of her front yard. And it's such a small area. You can really start so small. That's probably 10 feet by 2 feet max. But yeah, you don't have to rip out your whole lawn. You can make just a small strip that will really make all the difference in the world. So this is actually Nancy's yard. And it's showing us another great transition from, this is work that I'm pretty sure she did all by herself too.
My husband, I got
Yeah,
Here's how it works. I point, he digs.
it's a perfect system. But in just 3 years, that area is unrecognizable. There's extensive coverage, there's lots of greenery. I mean, look at those blooms. You know, this is just one clip in time, probably mid to late summer, because I believe that's Joe Pye. This area has been entirely transformed, and there's no way that a picture will ever capture just what is going on in the environment at any given time. But just to see something so full like this, like it really gives you hope. At least me hope. It's beautiful to see. Okay, planting tips. So it's not just us that appreciates good design. The pollinators do as well. Do you want to come up and talk about this too? Yeah.
Playing tag team here. So yeah, what we like to say is that the pollinators benefit from good design. All of these things or what we do when I have a customer call me, the first thing we do is ask them what they're looking for. So I'm looking for a pollinator garden, easy, because pollinators want what we want. And we start with what they've got, as Madison just described, the soil conditions, the moisture, the sun, the space. And then we take all of that, I kind of feed it into a filter, and I say, okay, what will grow there based on those conditions? And then we try to do this. Planting in groups and masses. Everyone knows that if you're looking at a beautiful garden, mass things, many numbers of a single thing looks better than one thing here, one thing here, one thing here, something different over here.
Ideally odd numbers, and if you could keep them out of a straight line, kind of mimic what is a natural drift of plants. Like kind of think of like pictures you've seen of the California super bloom, and how there are one type of plant going like this, and then another like this. You want them to kind of carry your eye across the landscape, as well as they provide nectar and habitat across the landscape to allow creatures to move across it.
So that would be for a bigger project, but as Madison just showed you with a very small project, we showed you two very small projects, and the last one that she showed you, there was probably only 3 types of plants in that, but there were a bunch of them. 3 types of plants. So more than one thing, and because that provides more foraging for the insects, and also like we were saying earlier, if there's damage on some, there's enough to feed the ones that are left will bloom. Always aim to have something in bloom. Everyone who talks to us about designing the garden wants something blooming all the time. It's a challenge, and I often will say we have to be able to live with quiet times in the garden, so there's not always something blooming. But that's what we're going for, and that's what the pollinators are looking for. Obviously, the bigger space you have to work with, the more stuff you can get in there, and the more bloom, more consistently that there's something blooming from now until really late October. First frost, past the first frost. There's stuff that will bloom after the first frost. I've got little things blooming in my garden right now. Diversity in plant picks, color, height, flower, and shape. This meets the needs of the different pollinators. The more diversity you have in color, picking stems, we talked about pithy stems, meaning the hollow stems that are really important for insect larvae overwintering in them. You want height. Some pollinators will prefer taller things, shrubbier things, lower things, just a diversity. Layer your canopy. Layer, and that means vertically. You want trees, shrubs, perennials, and ground covers. And again, this is if we're talking, the scope of your yard. They call it habitat stratification. So you're stratifying vertically. I think I have a picture, yes. I don't know if anyone, this is one of my favorite trees. This is actually the Simsbury Farms golf course. I have a picture of this tree in about every season. I have a picture from me lying in the snow looking up on a winter of blue sky bluebird day. It's a gorgeous, thankfully it was a golf course, they didn't cut down this venerable old gorgeous huge couple 100-year-old oak. But what do you notice about that oak? It's by itself, and what's underneath it? Grass and pavement. So this huge oak, which is one of our most important keystone species, the most productive keystone species in terms of the life that it supports, is supporting a tiny fraction of what it could support if it had some planting underneath it. more than 90%, I forget the exact number, but more than 90% of our native insects actually drop to the ground from the trees to pupate, to complete their life cycle. So Doug Tallamy, who you've heard us all talk about, refers to this as an ecological, what's it called? Trap. What is it, Marjorie? Ecological trap. Because it draws all of the insects in to begin their life cycle in the canopy of the tree, but then they can't complete their life cycle because they've got nothing to drop into. So that's why this is a gorgeous, thankfully they didn't cut it down, but it could be a lot healthier.
And with that, we'd like to promote, if you guys don't know where to start with creating a garden bed or getting rid of your lawn underneath your trees, especially your native, larger habitat trees. That's, yes, leave the leaves, of course, but also that is a great place to start a bed. Putting in some shrubs, perennials, and ground covers underneath that are gonna help anything that is starting its life up in the canopy to be able to continue and finish it down below.
And you can start the bed by leaving the leaves, because that will start to create the soil that you need to plant in. Because it's gonna be tough to plant in the green cement that's under that tree.
Can you tell us what shrubs to plant underneath?
We'll talk about that in a little bit. Actually, one of the things Nancy wanted me to show you this book. This is my book, and we brought a bunch of our books over there for you to flip through. This is by the Native Plant Trust. It's called the Northeast Native Plant Primer. 235 plants for an earth-friendly garden. You can buy this through the Native Plant Trust website. It's a very clear and concise. It's got beautiful pictures. It's a really useful book. So I don't know if, and again, on the resource link is the Native Plant Trust Plant Finder, and you can sort by, do you want perennials, do you want a shrub, do you want a tree, is it wet soil, is it full sun, is it, do you want bloom, you can sort by all those things and it will give you a list of what will grow in that site.